Sure, hi, Canada, and happy Canada Day on this July 1st. Greetings, everyone. Hugh Hewitt here, hour number 3 of the show today, joined by Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment, Keith Krach. Welcome, Mr. Undersecretary. Great to have you back.
By the way, it's great to be here, Hugh. I appreciate it. I
Uh,
got to give you one caveat up front. Senator Cotton said we can't talk about the Browns anymore, so we'll probably talk about the tribe. I don't know.
well, I could ask you if Purdue's ever going to start a football program.
Well, we're working on it. I can tell you that.
Coach Meyer listens occasionally. I had to put that one in there for him. Hey, Undersecretary, this is a big day for what you do because it's a big day of China news. They passed their crackdown on Hong Kong, which should alarm the world, and they've already begun to enforce it. And Singapore announced yesterday that they are going their 5G network to Ericsson and Nokia. You've worked on both issues. Can you explain the significance of both things, both the China crackdown and the Singapore decision?
By the way, you bet. And first let's look at the 5G because the tide is turning toward as citizens of the world are waking up to the danger of the Chinese Communist Party surveillance state. And if you look at that, the world, these citizens have given the political will to government leaders and to corporate CEOs. And I think they understand China's three-pronged strategy of concealment, co-option, and coercion. And they see that with the pandemic. I mean, the pandemic is a result of the concealment of the virus. They see economies co-opted by entangling supply chains, and then they see this so-called face mask diplomacy program as a tool for the Communist Party for seduction and coercion, leveraging their medical supplies. And then you throw on absolutely just broke the treaty. And I had a chance yesterday. One of our guys translated the new law. I think there's about 66 clauses in there, and it takes away any freedom that Hong Kong has, including the media.
Oh,
And,
yeah. It's an
and
absolute suppression. I'm curious, by the way. You're a Silicon Valley guy, though. You're a Browns fan, so there's good and bad in you. But let's talk about the Silicon Valley part. Your friends, I described Silicon Valley. Did you play Risk, by the way, Mr. Undersecretary, when you were a kid? Did you play the game Risk?
it was my favorite game. I love that game.
All right, so here's my analogy. North America is Amazon, Google is Asia, and Facebook is Europe in Risk. And so Google, being in Asia, is the most compromised Silicon Valley company when it comes to selling their technology to the PRC. Have you spoken to them about what they are doing?
By the way, I have. I know the folks at Google very well, and as you know, they pulled out of China with regard to their search engine, and that's the so-called Great Chinese Firewall, where all the data can go in, none can come out. But in terms of the propaganda, it's the reciprocal. All can go out, but none can come in. And what we're seeing, and by the way, this is where 5G comes in, is they are extending that China firewall over to other nations. And if you see, for example, in India, what they just announced last week is they're banning 50 Chinese apps, including TikTok. Because if you look at 5G, that's laying the backbone for the surveillance state. And these apps are an appendage to that backbone because that's the edge. That's how people utilize it. So that
I
combination.
agree with that, but I am assured by your statement that Google has pulled out of China. Are you sure that they have stopped developing tools that the Chinese Communist Party can use to further their oppression of their people and beyond their borders?
By the way, they would love to get in there, and we're working with them on many fronts. As you know, one of the things that now that they don't do is they don't allow their operating system to go on Huawei phones. So uh, and I know those guys over there very well, and we're
All right.
working with all the high tech companies.
Now, I want to
So
go back to Singapore, but by the way, do you like my Risk analogy when we compare the Silicon Valley to the Risk board that Amazon is North America, Facebook is Europe and Google is Asia?
Well, by the way, it's a great analogy because in Silicon Valley, what we do is we practice economic warcraft. Now,
Yes.
it just so happens that because it's all about being the category king. Because if you're the category king, you get 80% of the resource, you get 80% of the market cap, and number two, three, four, five, they have to fight over the scraps. Now, the difference between economic warcraft in Silicon Valley versus China is that in Silicon Valley, we play by the rules because out here, if you don't have your integrity, you don't have anything. And China doesn't play by the rules. And we all believe in free markets. But when you have somebody enter that market that doesn't play by the rules, the market is no longer free.
Oh yeah, the Chinese Communist Party sits down to play Risk and they turn the board over. I mean that's how they play. They just make up their rules and they get all the armies.
By the way, they totally do, and 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 they do it. Their stated doctrine is to seduce with money and to reinforce with intimidation and retaliation. And when I talk to my counterparts in all these other countries, that is the 800-pound elephant sitting in a room, and that's the retaliation. You've seen it a lot. You saw him retaliate against Norway for 5 years when they put up a Chinese dissident for the Nobel Prize. You saw him retaliate against Korea when they put missiles on that Lotte golf course. You've seen him retaliate against the NBA.
Yeah,
And
Under Secretary Krach, Brad Thor's brand new book, Near Dark, begins with the Norwegian retaliation. They were ready for, and China's espionage hackers went after Norwegian banking, Norwegian finance, Norwegian infrastructure for 5 years. Brad opened my eyes to that. I did not know that they'd gone after Norway that way.
oh, by the way, these guys will never forget it. I live right next door to the Norwegian embassy. And I mean, these guys bring that up all the time. And then now you just recently saw it play out with Hong Kong and 5G. So all of a sudden, the UK says, we were going to let about, a small percentage of Huawei come into the UK. And once they announced they were revisiting that decision, you saw that from Beijing, they threatened HSBC, the British bank. You saw the Chinese ambassador in the UK threatened to pull out their $100 billion investment in infrastructure. And by the way, so what did Secretary Pompeo say? Here's what he said. He said, we stand with our allies. We stand with the UK. Whatever you need, we'll be there. Because China is a bully. And by the way, we've all had experiences, Hugh, sometimes in our life with bullies. And the one thing I know is when you confront a bully, it backs down. The other thing I know is that when you confront a bully and you have your friends by your side, then they really back down. And
Well, that brings me to Singapore. What are we going to do to support Singapore's decision to support Nokia and Ericsson? It seems to me that every international banking concern should be leaving Hong Kong and going to Singapore, and that the United States should support every such move.
by the way, that's a big move in Singapore. Their two largest telcos, and they're right there. I mean, they're at the crossroads of Asia, and we're going to do the same thing with Singapore we did the UK. We're going to stand by their side. And by the way, if you look at that, it's causing this whole thing. When you combine it all, it's causing governments to allow only trusted vendors in there. Uh, by the way, here's some of the countries that do that: Japan, Australia, Czech Republic, Poland, Sweden, Estonia, Romania, Denmark, Latvia. A couple of weeks ago, the three big telcos in Canada decided to partner with Ericsson and Nokia because the Canadian citizens' public opinion was overwhelmingly in favor against allowing Huawei and 5G.
So 1 minute left, Undersecretary. Are you confident that we will win this economic competition with China short of military competition? It's going to be ferocious. Are you confident we can do that short of military conflict?
By the way, I am, and here's why. Uh, because at the end of the day, people around the world understand there is no sustained prosperity without liberty. And if you echo in the far corners freedom, it'll spread like wildfire. And I think we've got the strategy with our economic security strategy. Uh, we've got the strategy in place. We're executing it now, and you're seeing us doing it systematically. And you're going to see some other things that Secretary Pompeo's going to say later on. We are in the heat of it. It's going to be tough. We've got to have it. We've got to think long term, enduring strategy, and we've got to fight fire with fire as well. And by the way, we got to have our allies in the private sector on our side. That's a great.
I'm so glad to hear you say Silicon Valley is. Undersecretary Keith Krach, thank you. Don't go anywhere, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.